The day I finished installing solar panels on my roof, I knew I was in for it the second I saw Deborah Linton marching across my lawn like she owned the place. She always had that clipboard in her hand, tight curls bouncing with every angry step. Deborah was the president of our HOA, self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac. She ran our neighborhood like a tyrant with a vendetta against anything that made her feel less important. And apparently, renewable energy was her latest threat. "You didn't submit a request for panel installation," she snapped, squinting up at my roof like it had personally offended her. I wiped the sweat off my forehead and leaned against my ladder. "Didn't need to. State law says I can install solar panels without HOA approval." "It's called the Solar Rights Act." Her face twitched. "Not in this neighborhood, Quincy. We have architectural standards. Those hideous panels are a violation of Section 12. I crossed my arms. "Your covenant's outdated." "It was written before the state even passed the law." She narrowed her eyes. "You'll be receiving a violation notice and a fine." Sure enough, the next morning, I had a bright pink envelope taped to my front door with a notice of violation for $500. $500. For using solar energy. I wasn't just mad, I was ready. See, I'm not just some random guy with a drill and a dream. I'm Quincy Hartwell, retired municipal lawyer. I've written zoning regulations and argued cases in front of state judges. I knew the exact law she was breaking, and I had receipts. I didn't pay the fine. I sent her a certified letter quoting the California Solar Rights Act and demanded she cease harassment. She doubled down. Suddenly, I was getting random inspections, threats to lien my property, letters accusing me of damaging neighborhood aesthetics. One morning, I walked out to find a bright orange sticker on my garage, pending HOA enforcement noncompliance. I tore it off and walked straight to the courthouse. By then, I'd already pulled public records, scanned their outdated covenants, and filed a formal complaint. The HOA had never updated their documents to comply with state law. Worse, they were fining homeowners illegally for years under that same outdated garbage. I wasn't just fighting for my solar panels anymore. I was going to end them. HOA story, HOA stories, homeowners association stories. The clerk at the county courthouse barely looked up when I filed the civil complaint. She slid the stamped copy back across the counter and said, "You're the fourth one this month to file against a homeowners association. Something's in the air." I gave her a nod, tucked the paperwork into my folder, and walked out into the blazing afternoon. The sun lit up the panels on my roof like a silent protest. Good. Let it glare back home. I didn't have time to step inside before I noticed a man in a blue polo crouched by my mailbox. I called out. "Hey, can I help you?" He stood, brushing dirt off his khakis. "Just checking compliance." "Routine." "Routine for who?" He showed me an ID badge clipped to his collar. "HOA compliance contractor. We're inspecting mailbox heights, post conditions, and street number visibility." "Interesting," I said, stepping closer. "Because my mailbox hasn't changed in 12 years and I'm the only one getting inspected today." He shifted. "We go where we're told." "Who told you to come here?" He hesitated, then muttered, "Deborah Linton." I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of his badge and his clipboard. He frowned. "You can't photograph me. You're on my property. Get off it." He left without another word. Inside, I opened my laptop, pulled up the HOA's financial disclosures, and started cross-referencing. They'd recently hired an outside contractor for aesthetic inspections, but there was no bid process. No invoices either. Just vague allocations and a withdrawal of nearly $10,000 labeled Property Oversight Enhancement. That was public funds, our dues being siphoned off without documentation. I called a friend of mine, Elise, who worked at the district attorney's office in financial crimes. We'd done 3 zoning cases together back in the day. I didn't beat around the bush. "Elise, I've got a neighborhood board president using HOA funds for personal contractor kickbacks." "You got bandwidth," her voice sharpened. "You have documentation enough to get a warrant. Email it." "I'll get it in front of my supervisor." I sent her every spreadsheet, memo, and scan check I had. Half an hour later, she called back. This is bad, Q. If this Deborah's directing funds without quorum approval and she's hiring contractors under the table, we're looking at embezzlement. I'll loop in the white-collar crimes unit. The next morning, I got a call from a guy named Detective Farrow. He asked if we could talk in person. I told him I'd be on my porch with coffee and a front-row view of the HOA's meltdown. He showed up 20 minutes later, plainclothes, clipboard in hand. We went over the documents and I gave him the name of the mailbox contractor. He made notes, asked about board meeting minutes and whether those financial decisions had been voted on. They haven't held a single public meeting in over a year, I said. That's a violation of their own bylaws. Everything's been done through email chains and Deborah's directives. He nodded. That's enough for a subpoena. Meanwhile, I filed a motion with the civil court to expedite my case. The judge reviewed the HOA's covenant and bylaws alongside the Solar Rights Act and granted an emergency hearing. The HOA had 10 days to respond. Deborah responded in the only way she knew how, with intimidation. 3 days before the hearing, she had 2 board members post signs around the neighborhood declaring a special assessment meeting to address non-compliant homeowners and illegal installations. The signs were handwritten, stapled to telephone poles, and completely out of protocol. That night, I knocked on my neighbor's door, Carlos Gutierrez, a retired Navy engineer who always kept to himself. "Carlos," I said, "you got one of those flyers." "Yeah, trash. Why?" "Because she's trying to levy fines without a vote or legal basis." His brow furrowed. "She can't do that, I know, but she thinks no one's going to stop her." He nodded slowly. "Let me make some calls." By the time the meeting rolled around, Deborah had set up folding chairs on the community lawn. Maybe 20 people showed up, mostly out of curiosity. She stood in front of a plastic table with a megaphone, and the same clipboard she always carried like a badge of honor. Before she could speak, Carlos stepped forward with a small group behind him: older residents, a few young families, and even the guy with the classic car collection on Sycamore Drive. They were holding printed copies of the HOA bylaws. "Deborah," Carlos said calmly, "you don't have quorum. You didn't give proper notice. This meeting isn't valid." She looked flustered. "This is an emergency session. You don't have emergency powers." Section 8 says all meetings require 72 hours written notice and a published agenda. She tried to wave him off, but people started murmuring. Someone shouted, "Where's the money going, Deborah?" Another voice. "Why haven't we seen financials in months?" The meeting unraveled in minutes. I didn't even need to say a word. That night, I got a call from Detective Farrow. We served a warrant at the HOA office, found 3 sets of books. One with member dues, one with expenses, and a third hidden in a locked drawer. That one shows personal transfers to Deborah's account. I exhaled slowly. "What are you charging?" "Fraud, embezzlement, abuse of fiduciary duty." "We're taking her in tomorrow." The morning of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. News had spread fast, and half the neighborhood showed up to see what would happen. Deborah arrived with a lawyer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I sat at the petitioner's table with a stack of evidence and a binder 3 inches thick. The judge, a woman named Justice Patel, barely glanced at Deborah before turning to me. "Mr. Hartwell, I've reviewed your filings. Let's begin." It didn't take long. I walked her through the outdated covenant, the state statute, the unlawful fines, and the retaliatory inspections. Then I handed over a printed email chain Deborah had sent to the board, instructing them to target the panel guy to make an example. Justice Patel looked over her glasses at Deborah. "Did you authorize this?" Her attorney tried to object, but Deborah blurted out, "I was maintaining order." "He was undermining our community standards." The judge leaned back. "Your standards are unenforceable under current law. You've used this association as a personal enforcement tool. I find that you've violated state housing statutes and your own governing documents." She turned to the clerk. "Effective immediately, direct the county to dissolve this HOA board under Section 14 of the Civil Code. A court-appointed receiver will assume control pending audit. Gasps erupted. Deborah's lawyer whispered something, but she was too stunned to respond. As we left the courtroom, a reporter approached me. "Mr. Hartwell, do you think this sets a precedent?" I paused for a second. "I think it reminds people that power without accountability always ends the same way." I walked outside into the sun, panels gleaming overhead, and a neighborhood finally waking up. The weeks following the hearing were anything but quiet. I'd expected life to settle down after the court dissolved the HOA board. Instead, the neighborhood was left in an awkward limbo, no formal leadership, no official communications, and a whole lot of unanswered questions about where our money had gone. With the court-appointed receiver overseeing the audit, residents started poking around on their own, uncovering things that made even my stomach turn. For starters, one of the board members, a man named Lauren Beck, had been using HOA funds to pay a company registered in his wife's name. Landscaping, supposedly. But half the receipts were for consulting services with no work ever recorded. When the receiver's forensic accountants started digging, they found over $20,000 funneled into that account over the past 2 years. I ran into Lauren outside his house one afternoon. He was dragging a garbage bin to the curb with his head down. "You might want to talk to an attorney," I said, not stopping. He didn't look at me. "I didn't know what she was doing with the money." "She signed the invoices under your name." He didn't respond. By then, the receiver had started holding open meetings at the community center. Not the kind of meetings Deborah used to throw with catered coffee and pre-written talking points. These were real sessions, financial disclosures, Q&A, and a microphone that anyone could walk up to. At the first meeting, I sat near the back, watching faces I'd seen for years but never really known. When the receiver, a woman named Marcia Ellington, stepped up to the podium, the murmuring stopped. "As of today," she said, "we've identified over $70,000 in unapproved expenditures over the past 3 fiscal years. Gasps rippled through the room. "We also found that board elections have not been properly conducted since the year prior to the pandemic. No ballots were distributed, meeting minutes were falsified, and bank statements were routed to a private P.O. box belonging to the former board president." Someone near the front stood up. He looked like he'd aged 10 years since I last saw him washing his RV on the weekends. "Are you saying Deborah was stealing from all of us?" he asked, voice rising. Marcia paused. "We're saying the board misappropriated funds and acted without transparency or legal authority. Whether that qualifies as theft will be determined by the district attorney's office." That quieted the room. Carlos raised his hand. When called upon, he didn't hesitate. "Can we re-establish a new HOA, one that follows the law?" Marcia nodded. "That's up to the community. After the audit is complete, the court will allow the residents to vote on whether to dissolve the HOA entirely or re-charter it under new leadership and revised bylaws." Someone else shouted, "And what about the fines, the liens?" Marcia didn't flinch. "All invalidated. Any imposed without proper due process or legal authority will be nullified. Property owners will receive written confirmations." The energy in the room shifted, less outrage, more focus. You could see people starting to plan. That night, I returned home to find a small envelope taped to my door. No name, no return address, just folded paper inside. I opened it cautiously. It was a printed list: names, dates, payments, and check numbers. All of them corresponded to donations made to a neighborhood improvement fund Deborah had promoted during a community BBQ 2 summers ago. I remembered that event. She claimed the money would go toward a new playground set near the cul-de-sac. The playground was never built. The list showed deposits into a personal account matching the last 4 digits of her checking account from the audit records. Whoever had dropped this off knew exactly what they were doing. The next morning, I drove the sheet to the DA's office and handed it directly to Elise. She scanned it, then looked up. These weren't in the original batch. Anonymous tip, someone's talking. She set the paper down. This is enough to justify expanded charges. We're adding misappropriation of charitable funds. By the following week, Deborah had been formally indicted on 6 counts, including wire fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. The local news finally picked up the story. They aired footage of her being led out of her house in a blazer over pajama pants, hands cuffed in front. The anchor called it the largest HOA embezzlement case in county history. But that wasn't the end. The audit revealed something that hadn't come up in court. Deborah had taken out a loan using HOA funds as collateral. A private lender, unlicensed, with terms so predatory it bordered on extortion. The loan agreement was buried in a stack of scanned PDFs, signed under the name of the HOA treasurer who had died the year prior. The signature was forged. When the receiver presented that to the judge, the court froze all HOA accounts and issued a cease and desist order against the lender, triggering a legal chain reaction. The lender's attorney tried to claim the HOA had authorized it, but the forged signature and the deceased treasurer's name made that impossible to defend. The lender backed off, quietly, and then came the part I'd been waiting for: the community vote. Marcia organized it by certified mail and in-person drop-off. Each household had a ballot: dissolve the HOA permanently or re-charter under strict new bylaws with state oversight for the first 2 years. People were divided. Some still believed in the idea of a governing body. Others, burned by the corruption, wanted nothing more to do with it. I stood on my porch the night before the vote deadline, sipping tea and watching porch lights blink on across the street. Carlos walked over, hands in his jacket pockets. "Which way you voting?" he asked. "Dissolve," I said. "Too much damage, too many blind spots," he nodded. "I'm leaning that way too. You think we can do better without it?" "I think we'll hold each other accountable. That's more than the board ever did." The vote came in 3 days later, 79% in favor of dissolution. The judge finalized the order within 48 hours. The HOA was officially dead. In its place, a volunteer neighborhood group emerged, not a legal entity. No power to fine or enforce, just people coordinating clean-ups, sharing resources, and keeping an eye out for each other. No dues, no secret meetings, no power plays, just neighbors. One afternoon, as I was replacing a motion light on the side of my garage, a teenager on a bike stopped at the end of my driveway. "Hey," he said, pointing to the panels. "My science teacher said you're the reason those are legal here now." I raised an eyebrow. "They were always legal. People just stopped checking." He gave me a thumbs up and pedaled off. That, more than anything, told me we were heading in the right direction. No board, no fines. Just sunlight and a neighborhood finally seeing things clearly. 2 months after the HOA was dissolved, something strange started happening. Mailboxes that had been flagged for minor aesthetic violations under Deborah's regime were being mysteriously repainted overnight. Not by the homeowners. By someone else. All the work was identical: same gray gloss, same sloppy brush strokes, same streaks dripping down the posts. At first, people thought it was a leftover initiative from the old board. Maybe a contractor finishing a job late. But then a few homeowners, including a widow down the street named Mrs. Carruthers, found handwritten notes in their mailboxes unsigned, but threatening to stay compliant or else. Mrs. Carruthers brought the note to me, hands trembling. "I thought this was over," she said. "I didn't even want the repaint. My grandson just did it for me last month." I examined the handwriting. Sharp angles, forceful pen pressure, and a distinct backward loop on the letter G. "This wasn't a leftover anything," I said. "This is someone trying to keep the ghost of the HOA alive." I installed a trail cam under the eaves of my garage, angled toward the street. 3 nights later, I caught him. It was Lauren Beck. The same former board member who'd quietly faded into the background after the financial disclosures exposed his wife's shell company. He was wearing a reflective vest, and carrying a 5-gallon bucket in the crook of his arm, stopping at mailboxes and brushing over them in a rush, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. I downloaded the footage and sent it to Marcia, the former receiver. She was no longer obligated to oversee the neighborhood, but she still had contacts in the city attorney's office. Within a day, I had a call from a deputy investigator named Malik Jennings. "You're not going to believe this," Malik said. "We've been watching Lauren for weeks. He's part of a group trying to revive the HOA under a different name." "Let me guess," I said. "Something with the word council in it. Community Heritage Advisory Council. They've been holding private meetings at a nearby church, soliciting dues, and threatening residents with enforcement letters if they don't comply with old codes." I leaned back in my chair. "That's not just unethical, that's fraudulent impersonation of a defunct legal entity." "It gets worse," Malik said. "They filed paperwork with the county under a new nonprofit name and claimed to have taken over the responsibilities of the dissolved HOA, including authority over property assessments." My heart skipped. "Are they collecting money?" "Yup," he said, "and promising preferred treatment in future property tax disputes. It's a scam. And they're using the old database Deborah kept to target people who didn't vote in the dissolution." I emailed him the footage of Lauren painting mailboxes and the scanned note from Mrs. Carruthers. Malik confirmed the handwriting matched other letters they had already collected. The next week, search warrants were served. Lauren's garage was packed with files taken from Deborah's home office membership rosters, financial statements, even old violation templates with homeowners' names still printed on them. Turns out, after her arrest, Lauren had quietly removed boxes from her property before the court could seize everything. They also found a burner phone with text messages between Lauren and 2 other former board members, discussing how to reassert structure before the neighborhood falls apart. The county pressed charges: unlawful impersonation of a dissolved organization, attempted fraud, intimidation of vulnerable persons, and obstruction of a court order. Lauren was arrested at dawn with 2 others. The neighborhood buzzed with disbelief. Some residents felt betrayed again, while others were too exhausted to react. But the breaking point came when the sheriff's department confirmed that some of the mailed letters included forged county seals, an attempt to make them look like official government notices. That crossed the line into felony territory. Malik stopped by my house a few days later with an update. "The DA's office is adding mail fraud. That's federal. They're contacting the United States Postal Inspector Service." I raised an eyebrow. "You think they'll actually see jail time?" "They'll definitely see court, and with all the evidence." I'd say prison's not off the table. The trial was scheduled for early fall. By then, the neighborhood had started healing. The community group that had formed after the HOA's dissolution decided to build a public bulletin board near the park entrance. No power, no influence, just a place to post lost pet notices and block party flyers. I donated the lumber. Carlos built the frame. At the trial, I was called as a witness. So was Mrs. Carruthers. And even the teenager who'd stopped by my house weeks earlier, his family had received one of the fake letters, threatening that their basketball hoop violated heritage standards. The courtroom was quiet when the prosecutor played the security footage of Lauren repainting mailboxes. No one looked away, not even Lauren's attorney. When it was my turn to testify, the prosecutor asked one question that stuck with me. "Mr. Hartwell, in your opinion, why do you think these individuals went to such lengths to revive a dissolved HOA?" I didn't hesitate. "Because control, once tasted, doesn't let go easy, especially when no one ever told them no before." The jury took less than 6 hours to return a verdict, guilty on all counts. Lauren was sentenced to 4 years, the others to 2 and 3 respectively. They were also ordered to pay restitution to every homeowner who had received one of their fraudulent notices. The neighborhood finally exhaled. Weeks later, a small celebration was held at the community park, Nothing fancy, folding tables, a grill and pitchers of lemonade. Mrs. Carruthers brought cupcakes. Carlos tuned up his old radio and played classic vinyls. I didn't speak much that day. Didn't need to. People came up, shook my hand, said thank you. Not because I'd fought the HOA, but because I'd stayed when it would have been easier to move. As the sun dipped low, I looked out over the street, clean, quiet, and finally free. No signs posted on poles, no clipboards, just neighbors talking like neighbors again. I walked home under the warm dim of porch lights, a breeze carrying the faint scent of charcoal and cut grass. When I reached my driveway, the solar panels above me caught the last gold threads of daylight. No fines, no fake councils, just sunlight and peace.